Hi everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Liver and Guts podcast. My name's Dr Kash. I'm a gastroenterologist and hepatologist from the UK. It's a podcast that's hopefully going to help you understand and protect and nurture two of the most underappreciated systems in your body, your digestive tract and your liver. I'll try and be your guide through this journey, through the evidence of liver and gut health. But first, let me tell you a bit about myself, because I think it's important that you know who's talking to you and why I've decided to do this podcast. I have no idea if it's going to be popular, and this is the introductory episode. And I just want to try and get the essential bits off on this one episode, because if no one ever bothers watching anything else, hopefully the info in this segment will be of use to people. So, as I mentioned, I'm a gastroenterologist, hepatologist, and internal medicine physician. And that essentially means I'm a specialist who looks after people with problems affecting the gut, which is your gullet, stomach, intestines, as well as the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. So it's quite a big system. I also deal with general medical problems as well. And my training has taken me on quite a journey. I completed medical school at the Royal Free and University College London, and then went on to become a specialist trainee in Oxford. I gained advanced liver and transplant experience at Addenbrooke's Hospital and Cambridge University Hospitals in the UK, and completed my PhD or DPhil from Oxford, which was mainly based in liver immunology and genomics, although it was kind of titled as clinical medicine. That came from Oxford, but I did all the work, pretty much all the work, as a research fellow at Harvard Medical School, where I kind of audited some of their classes as well. And I learned a massive amount there, lots of really smart, intimidating professors that I worked with, but it was amazing. Since then, I've built and led a dedicated hepatology service and transplant-linked program in Milton Keynes with Addenbrooke's Hospital, maintained links with Oxford for the viral hepatitis treatment, and continue to teach medical students, supervise trainees, and try and publish research in liver and gastrointestinal disease. So, why am I talking to a microphone rather than just seeing patients in clinic? And the honest answer is it's frustration, but a hopeful frustration, I think. I don't think what we're doing in medicine is going to be good enough, certainly not in the way we're doing it. And I think that the whole population needs to push back, and the only way they can push back is through knowledge. And it's either through individuals or groups that we can push back on why we're in a position where our health is just deteriorating. Over the years, I've spent time in hospitals, clinics, and research labs. And one thing is painfully obvious to me: there's a massive gap between what medical science now knows and has information on about the gut and liver disease, and what most people ever hear, whether that's in the doctor's surgery, in the media, or in public health campaigns. We hear constantly about heart disease. We're told to watch our cholesterol, to keep active for our hearts, to recognize signs for stroke. Dementia campaigns urge us to keep our minds sharp. Cancer awareness ribbons are everywhere. And rightly so, these are very important and serious conditions that affect millions. Cancer is the third biggest killer in the Western world, or at least USA, UK. But here's what's quietly happening in the background. Liver disease, digestive disease, and cancers of the GI tract have been climbing steadily up the rankings as causes of death and disability, particularly in Western countries like the UK and USA. And yet they still receive far less public attention than heart disease, stroke, or dementia. Let me just repeat that. These diseases are rising faster than any of the three top ones that I've mentioned. And out of cancer, at least a third is related to GI disease. And it's on the rise. I started the podcast because I believe knowledge is power. When people understand what's really happening inside their bodies in plain jargon-free language, they can make informed choices. They can spot warning signs earlier, they can have better conversations with their doctors, and most importantly, they can take practical steps to protect themselves. The aim of Liver and Guts is to bridge the gap between cutting-edge science and everyday understanding. I want to do this in a calm, practical, and hopeful way because even though the statistics I'm about to share might sound alarming, the good news is that so much of the disease burden is preventable. So let's start by looking at the numbers, and I'll try and explain them in a way that makes sense. So first of all, how big is the problem? Let's start with the global picture of liver disease. The numbers here are quite striking, and I think this might well be the biggest problem. Large international studies show that liver disease alone now causes over 2 million deaths every single year around the world. That's roughly 1 in every 25 deaths globally. Liver disease currently ranks around 11th as the leading cause of death worldwide, but if you take the USA on the CDC statistics, it's number 9 and rising. That's the key thing, rising. So to put that in perspective, if you gathered 25 people who died from any cause around the planet, statistically one of them would have died from liver. And what's concerning about that is it's not stable, it's getting worse. When researchers looked at death rates from liver disease across 112 countries, adjusting for age and population size, they found that global liver-related deaths have risen roughly 100 deaths per million people from back in 1990 to about 170 deaths per million people in 2021. That's a substantial increase, and we're talking a 70% rise in just 3 decades. Now, you might think, big deal, people are living longer, so naturally we're going to have more deaths from this condition. And that's partly true, but these figures are age adjusted, meaning researchers have accounted for the fact that populations are aging. And this increase represents a genuine rise in liver disease, not just because we have more elderly people. Let's zoom out and take a look at digestive diseases overall. And just bear in mind, this term covers conditions affecting the gullet, the esophagus, the stomach, intestines, liver, gallbladder, bile ducts, and the pancreas. There was a major global analysis, something called the Global Burden of Disease Study, which is one of the most comprehensive health studies surveys ever conducted. And they reported that in 2019 alone, there were approximately 8 million deaths from digestive diseases and 277 million what we call DALYs, or D-A-L-Y. Let me just explain what DALY is, because it's thrown around quite a lot in some of the papers. It's a term you'll hear me use, and it stands for Disability Adjusted Life Year. So 1 DALY represents 1 year of healthy life lost, either because someone died early or because they're living with significant illness or disability. So when I say 277 million DALYs, I mean that digestive diseases collectively robbed humanity of 277 million years of healthy, active life in 1 single year. So here's another way to think about this. Digestive conditions now account for more than 1/3 of all prevalent disease cases worldwide. That means a huge share of the world's illness, hospital admissions, and loss of quality of life is being driven by gut and liver problems. Let's talk about gastrointestinal cancers. Specifically, these cancers affect the gut, which includes the esophagus, stomach, and bowel, as well as the liver, gallbladder, bile ducts, and pancreas. Global analyses indicate that GI cancers together account for roughly 1/3 of all cancer deaths worldwide. Let that sink in. 1 in 3 cancer deaths involves the digestive system. Colorectal cancer, what most people call bowel cancer, and liver cancer, pancreatic cancer are among the most significant contributors. Let me just elaborate on that a little bit more. 1/3 of cancers are from the GI tract. If you look at the top 10 killers in the US, number 1 is heart disease, around 600,000 per year. Then you've got accidents, which I think is around 200 or 250,000 per year. And then you've got cancer, which is around 200,000 per year. That's from CDC data. 1/3 of those cancer deaths are from GI disease. And if you add up the number 9 cause of liver disease, liver cirrhosis included, that gives you a huge portion of cancer deaths. And what's particularly worrying is a trend that we're seeing in younger people. Researchers have noticed a rise in what they call early onset GI cancers, particularly bowel cancer diagnosed before the age of 50. And this has been increasing in many high-income countries, and it appears to track closely with obesity and metabolic health epidemics, which we've seen over recent decades. So we're not just talking about diseases of old age here, we're talking about conditions that are increasingly affecting people in the prime of their lives. So before we go any further, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with terminology. Medical jargon can be off-putting, and I want this podcast to be accessible to everyone. So let me just translate some key terms. First thing is gastrointestinal tract, also known as GI tract. Simply the digestive tube that connects organs and handles your food. It starts at your mouth, goes through your gullet, which doctors often call the esophagus, then your stomach, your small intestine, and finally the large intestine or the colon, and ends in your rectum, your back passage. The liver is that large organ sitting in the upper right of your abdomen, just under your ribs. It's an absolute workhorse, processes nutrients from your food, filters toxins from your blood, produces bile to help digest fats, and performs literally hundreds of life-saving reactions every hour. The biliary system refers to the network of bile ducts and the gallbladder. These carry bile from your liver to your small intestine to help digest and emulsify and digest and absorb fats and fat-soluble vitamins. You can think of the gallbladder as a storage bag for the bile. The pancreas is a gland that sits behind your stomach, kind of wrapped around the duodenum, the small intestine, and its main 2 jobs are producing digestive juices that break down food and producing hormones like insulin that control your blood sugar. Now, let me explain some disease terms you might encounter. Cirrhosis. Cirrhosis is advanced and permanent scarring of the liver. This happens after years of repeated damage, whether that's from fat building up in the liver, from alcohol, from viral infections, or from other causes. There are quite a number of others. Once cirrhosis develops, the liver becomes stiff and nodular, and you can get serious complications such as fluid buildup in the abdomen, confusion from toxins that can't be cleared, and dangerous bleeding from swollen veins. And you might have heard of something called fatty liver disease. The official term has recently changed to MASLD, MASLD, metabolic dysfunction associated steatotic liver disease. It used to be called NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And this is essentially a fatty liver caused by weight problems, insulin resistance, high blood sugar, cholesterol issues, rather than by alcohol, although alcohol can give a fatty liver. And it's become incredibly common in recent decades. And let me just mention that you do not have to be overweight to get a fatty liver. I have seen some slim people with terrible fatty livers and develop cirrhosis from it. And that's what's scary. One more term I wanted to mention, again, is the DALY, Disability Adjusted Life Year, Remember, DALY equals 1 year of healthy life lost, either through early death or through living with significant illness or disability. It's a way researchers have to measure the total impact of disease on populations. So why are liver and gut diseases on the rise? It's a crucial question. Why are we seeing these increases? What's changed? Across all the major studies on liver and digestive diseases, 5 broad categories of causes keep appearing. And let me walk you through each one. The first is a major driver. It's metabolic health. How well your body handles food, fat, and blood sugar. So common problems in this area include high BMI, body mass index, being overweight, excess fat around the organs is particularly important, and insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. We've heard a lot about this in the media. And these metabolic issues are strongly linked to fatty liver disease, which can progress in stages. First, simple fat accumulation, then inflammation, then scarring and fibrosis, and potentially leading to full-blown cirrhosis and then subsequently liver cancer. But it doesn't stop at the liver. The same background, obesity, insulin resistance, and chronic low-grade inflammation also raises the risk of colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, and stomach and bile duct cancers. I just also want to add in there that I've heard a lot of influencers talk about fatty liver when they're talking about insulin resistance, but what they're, I think, missing is the direct cause of death from the liver disease itself. That seems to be left out. A lot of people say, oh, well, you've got a fatty liver, you can fix it by fixing your metabolic syndrome. And that may be true, but people don't seem to be as worried about a fatty liver as they should be. Let me see if I can try and explain some of the mechanism here. I'll go into this later, but why does being overweight actually increase these risks? Well, when you have excess fat, particularly fat around your internal organs, which we call visceral fat, it doesn't just sit there passively. It actively releases signals that keep your immune system slightly switched on all the time. This creates a chronic state of low-grade inflammation throughout your body. And at the same time, high insulin levels, which often accompany excess weight, act as growth signals for cells, and the combination of inflammation and increased growth signals creates an environment where damaged cells are more likely to survive and multiply rather than being cleared away. And so over time, this can lead to cancer development. The second driver appears to be closely related to the first. It's about what we eat and how much we move. So many Western style and urban diets share common features. They tend to be high in ultra-processed foods, packaged foods, snacks, fast food, sugary drinks. They're high in red and processed meat. They're high in sugar, refined carbohydrates like white bread, white rice, and sweets. They're high in unhealthy, saturated fats, and they're low in fiber, vegetables, fruit, nuts, and seeds. This dietary pattern is repeatedly associated with higher rates of colorectal, stomach, pancreatic, and liver cancers, as well as gallstone and bile duct disease. It also worsens fatty liver, raises cholesterol and triglycerides, driving more fat into the liver and around the organs. Combine that with low physical activity, lots of sitting, limiting walking or exercise. This pattern worsens insulin resistance and weight gain, further risking both metabolic liver disease and GI cancers, particularly bowel cancer. The third driver, alcohol and smoking, 2 powerful toxins that many people consume regularly. Let's talk about alcohol first. Alcohol can cause fat and inflammation in the liver long before cirrhosis develops. Conditions called alcohol-related fatty liver and alcoholic hepatitis. With ongoing heavy or prolonged drinking, the risk of cirrhosis and liver cancer rises steeply, especially when combined with other risk factors like fatty liver disease or viral hepatitis. And I may not talk about viral hepatitis as much, but when your liver function tests are abnormal, it's worth checking those things. I've seen lots of people with chronic viruses that they never imagined that they would have. But going back to alcohol, alcohol doesn't just affect the liver, it also damages the lining of the gullet, the stomach, the bowel, and increases the risk of cancers in these areas. The mechanism is quite direct. When your body breaks down alcohol, it produces a compound called acetaldehyde. This is a toxic substance that binds to your DNA and interferes with normal repair processes, directly promoting cancer development. Smoking, meanwhile, increases the risk of esophageal cancer, stomach, pancreatic and colorectal cancers, and worsens a range of upper GI conditions. When combined with alcohol, poor diet, or viral hepatitis, smoking further amplifies liver and GI risk. There's recent data that shows that alcohol-associated liver disease and alcohol-triggered liver failure have been increasing in many regions, including Western countries, often in younger adults who stand to lose many decades of healthy life. The fourth driver are infections and something called the gut microbiome. Massively important, massively connected with your liver health, your overall health, your muscle health, everything. And we'll certainly talk about the microbiome a lot more in further episodes. Historically, some of the biggest causes of liver and GI disease have been infections. Chronic viral hepatitis B and C still account for a large portion of cirrhosis and liver cancer, especially in parts of Africa and Asia, although vaccination and new antiviral treatments, especially for hep C, are reducing deaths in certainly in the Western world. A bacterium called Helicobacter pylori, for which a gastroenterologist scientist in Australia won the Nobel Prize for discovering, remains a major cause for peptic ulcers and stomach cancer, particularly in areas where sanitation or access to treatment is limited. But more recently, research has turned into attention to something fascinating, the gut microbiome. This refers to trillions of microbes in your intestine. When the microbiome becomes imbalanced, a state of what we call dysbiosis occurs, and the intestinal barrier becomes leaky. Bacterial products can pass into the bloodstream and reach the liver. And these microbial products can trigger liver inflammation, influence bile acids and other signaling molecules, and alter cancer risk of the colon, liver, and pancreas. Think of it like this: your gut lining is supposed to be a careful, controlled border. It lets nutrients through but keeps harmful substances out. When that border becomes leaky due to unhealthy diets, certain medications or infections, things that shouldn't get through, suddenly do, and they cause problems throughout your body. The fifth driver and the final category, it would be demographic and social factors. So as people live longer, they are simply more years in which chronic liver and GI diseases can develop and progress. So even when age-specific rates are stable, the absolute numbers of deaths and serious illness rise. Urbanization and economic development often brings more calorie-dense food, less physical activity, and greater access to alcohol and tobacco, without matching investment in prevention, screening, and early treatment. These are all stark inequality dimension to this. There's a stark inequality dimension to this. Digestive and liver diseases are consistently more common and more severe in socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. And they're more likely to have unhealthy diets, higher exposure to alcohol and smoking, and less access to good doctor practices and specialist services. This means that even in high-income countries like UK or USA, certain regions and communities experience very high death rates from alcohol-related liver disease, as well as things like fatty liver disease and GI cancers. I do want to spend a few minutes just talking about the mechanisms of how this happens. I've touched on it earlier, but understanding why it happens and how it may motivate people in making the right choices. The scientific papers go into deep molecular detail, but here are some simple threads and explanations on how risk factors turn into real disease. The first one we mentioned before being chronic inflammation. So when your liver or gut is repeatedly irritated by fat, alcohol, infections, or toxins, your immune system stays slightly switched on all the time. This isn't the dramatic inflammation you get when you cut your finger. It's slow, it's like a slow, persistent burn. And the chronic inflammation damages cells and encourages scarring, what doctors call fibrosis in the liver and the gut. And the cells are constantly inflamed. They're more prone to DNA damage, and DNA damage is the first step towards cancer because the cells reproduce in the wrong way. The second mechanism involves sugar, insulin, and growth signals. Diets rich in sugar and refined starches drive high insulin levels and other growth-promoting signals in your body. Over time, this creates a biochemical environment which damages cells where damaged cells are more likely to survive and divide rather than dying off as they should. This raises the risk of tumours in the liver, colon, and pancreas. The third mechanism is the concept of toxic fat and oxidative stress. Fat stored inside liver cells and around organs can release harmful molecules and generate what scientists call oxidative stress or free radicals, a type of internal chemical damage. Think of it like rust forming on metal. The damaged cell structures contribute to fibrosis and increase the risk of liver cancer. The fourth, which is what a lot of people talk about in the media, are direct carcinogens, substances that directly cause cancer. And as I mentioned, alcohol is metabolized into acetaldehyde, a toxic compound that binds to DNA and interferes with normal repair mechanisms. Other carcinogens include compounds formed from processed and charred meats, nitrites in preserved foods, and certain toxins like aflatoxins that can contaminate grains and nuts. These directly damage DNA in gut and liver cells. Number 5, the microbiome and breakdown of that barrier. Unhealthy diets, certain medications, infections can shift the microbiome towards species that become more harmful substances and weaken the gut barrier. When this barrier becomes leaky, bacterial fragments can reach the liver through the bloodstream. There they activate immune cells, worsen fatty liver, promoting fibrosis and tumour growth. What's remarkable about all 5 of these mechanisms, though, is that they're all interconnected. They often feed into each other, creating a vicious cycle. But this is the hopeful part, because addressing any one of them can often improve the others and break that cycle. So what can we do? I've given you a lot of sobering statistics today, but I want to end on a note of empowerment, because the same science that identifies these risks also highlights clear, practical steps that can reduce them. And let me share some evidence-based strategies for protecting your gut and your liver. So the first is to consider your diet. This doesn't mean crash diets or extreme restrictions. It means building practical meal patterns that support a healthy liver and steady blood sugar and a diverse microbiome. And yes, the microbiome is important. I know there's been a lot of talk online about how not having a diverse microbiome is okay, but it's not. And it is important to have the right type of foods to help develop that diverse microbiome. Focus on increasing fiber intake. That means more vegetables, fruits, legumes like lentils and beans and whole grains. Fiber feeds the beneficial bacteria in your gut and helps maintain a healthy barrier. Reduce ultra-processed foods, sugary drinks, refined carbohydrates. Limit red and processed meats. Include healthy fats from sources like olive oil, nuts, and oily fish. The Mediterranean diet is often mentioned in the research as a protective pattern, and that's because it naturally incorporates these principles. Make sure you move more. Increase your physical activity. You don't need to become a marathon runner. Simply evidence-based approaches work wonderfully. Regular walking, ideally at least 150 minutes of moderate activity per week, combined with some resistance work or strength training, can drastically improve your insulin sensitivity and reduce liver fat and lower cancer risk. Having said that, I'm a big fan of high-intensity interval training. We'll talk about exercise and the benefits it has on your liver, gut, muscle, and microbiome in future episodes. But the key is consistency rather than intensity overall. A daily 30-minute walk is more beneficial than going to have an intense gym session, followed by weeks of inactivity. Rethink alcohol. Take a clear look at your alcohol consumption. It doesn't necessarily mean giving up completely, although I'd prefer that. Though for some people, if you've got pre-existing liver disease and other risk factors, that's probably the safest choice. Science-based guidance suggests understanding what lower risk drinking actually looks like and recognizing that this change, if you already have risk factors like fatty liver disease or viral hepatitis, is important. If you're concerned about your drinking, speak honestly with your doctor. There are effective strategies for reducing alcohol that focus on health, energy, and long-term quality of life rather than, guilt or shame. And I've been in the business for decades now. I know not to create stigma around alcohol and blame people for it. It is more complex than that, and we will talk about that in future episodes. The fourth is straightforward. If you smoke, just stop it. Smoking increases your risk of multiple GI cancers and amplifies the harm and other risk factors. And there are many effective cessation support groups available, and they didn't exist a decade ago. So really important to try and give up smoking. And I know it's easier said than done. Number 5 is support your microbiome. Many of the dietary changes I've mentioned, more fiber, more plant-based foods, fewer processed foods, naturally help shift the microbiome in a favorable direction. Sleep and stress management also help, and exercise also influence your gut microbiome. Some people may benefit from probiotics, but this is a controversial area, and that benefit they feel may be a placebo effect. But the evidence is still growing on the probiotics, prebiotics. But I don't generally say go and have a probiotic to help normalize your microbiome. There are more bacteria in the microbiome than there are cells in your body, and it's slightly naive to think that a handful of species in a drink is going to alter it. Remember, your microbiome changes from morning to evening, from season to season, and what activity you produce. Engage with screening is the next one. Don't ignore those opportunities. Bowel cancer screening, particularly important, whether that's through a colonoscopy or a stool test. It's really important to capture cancer early, prevent it by removing cancerous polyps. And if you're at risk of liver disease, screening blood test, FibroScan, ultrasound, these are really important screening tools. We have picked so many people, picked so many cancers and cirrhosis up on screening. Directly myself, seen my colleagues do it. It's so important. It does save lives. People will not know that they've got it. Know your risk factors. Have conversations with your doctor and don't put off screening. You will live longer for it. So as we come to the end of this first episode, I want to leave you with a message of hope. Yes, liver disease and gastrointestinal disease are on the rise massively. They're rising faster than things like heart attacks and dementia. But so much of this disease burden is within our power to prevent or actually reverse. And the aim of this podcast is not to frighten you to make you feel guilty about your lifestyle choices. It's to translate high-level hepatology and GI research into realistic, sustainable changes that protect both your lifespan and health span. Health span is a word I'll use in this podcast. It means years of your life spent in good health, not just alive by thriving. And the first researcher back in the 80s, James Fries, who was a Stanford, I think, epidemiologist, introduced the idea of this by suggesting that we should try and reduce disability and poor health into a shorter period towards the end of your life. I think that in modern society, having a good health span isn't just by saying you need to change your lifestyle. And I will talk about this further, but I think lifestyle itself implies that the individual is completely responsible for this. I think there is a terminology that I think about using called the life set, where I think things around you are set in a certain way that make it more difficult for you to have a healthy lifestyle and therefore a longer health span. And I think altering that life set is difficult, but I think just relying on willpower isn't going to be good enough, certainly not at a population level. It may well be good enough for certain individuals. And so I try and talk about, I will try and talk about strategies of altering your life set, creating systems around you so that you don't fail. And that's what we do in work. When we see something go wrong, it's about changing the systems around you, or creating systems around you so that you don't fail again. The goal isn't to get perfection. That's like saying, I'm investing in the stock market, I'm going to buy absolutely low and sell exactly high. It doesn't happen. It's steady, achievable changes that dramatically reduce your risk while helping you feel and function better as you go along. And in future episodes, we'll do further deep dives into specific topics, understanding what blood tests may demonstrate, the truth about fatty liver and how we interpret the latest research, and much more. Thank you very much for listening to the first episode of Liver and Guts. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you did, please share it with someone you care about, or use the information to help yourself, your family, your kids, your parents, your grandparents. And I genuinely hope it helps change lives. Until next time, take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.